Hey guys, Seafood Chuck here. I just want to talk to you today about a few modalities and mindsets that you have to have during your training career as a martial artist. So it doesn't matter what style you're in, it's going to help you actually refine what you're doing and what your responsibilities are in those types of training. So the first one we have is teaching. So when you're in that teaching mode, your objective is actually to share information. Sometimes you are demonstrating technique, but your goal there is to help demonstrate the key principles and ideas that are being taught, right? Your goal is to help transmit that information from you to your students or to your partners. So that's a part of what you want to look at inside teaching. The next stage down is what I call training or drilling. So when you're looking at training and drilling, that's working a technique. The thing is, what you're finding out is it's not necessarily adversarial or competitive in that position. What you're doing is you're refining a technique. So you have two particular positions or jobs. You have either someone I refer to as the trainer, who is the person that's feeding the drill, running the drill, making sure that things are happening in a certain way, and then you have the trainee, or basically it's the person that's going through the drill. Now, you need to understand the objectives of both people are similar, but they're slightly different. When you're looking as the trainer, your objective should be to help set up things in such a way that the trainee, the person experiencing the actual drill, is getting the most of it. But you're also setting the intensity up or down. So if somebody's having difficulty, your job is not to beat them. Your job is to help them to succeed in that particular drill that they're working on. Because again, this is not competition, this is not fighting. What this is just refining a particular action or skill set. So when you keep that in mind, as the trainer, your goal is to actually help your partner, the trainee, to actually become better at that drill. Because you would want somebody to help you to push your levels and your limits, but within a range that you can actually learn in, not to beat you and defeat you in that drill. This is one of the most common errors that actually happens in training, where whether you're doing an entry or whether you're passing somebody's guard in jiu-jitsu or whether you're doing a disarming kali, sometimes your partner may think it's somehow competition, and as a result they try to make it more and more and more difficult. I'm not talking about reality here. What I am talking about is isolating something for the sake of refining a skill set. There will be later stages in which you can increase that intensity. And again, you want to increase that intensity with your partner in relation to their skill set while still maintaining the objective of the drill. So as an example, let's say, I'm going to use jiu-jitsu today. Let's say you're working on breaking somebody's guard. So you're in somebody's closed guard and you're breaking their guard. As the person learning how to break the guard, they have a set skill set because we know what they're going to do. The person that's holding guard, your objective is to help them to use you as a partner to learn to master the motor skills and the timing for passing guard or breaking guard. The other end, eventually what you want to do is you may add a little bit more resistance, just in small incremental steps and see where they go. If your partner becomes frustrated or is unable to continue with the drill, your intensity is way too high and you need to bring that back down. So now with the trainee's goal is to just continually refine the motor skill sets and to remember all the major points and to move through the actions. The other objective of the trainee is not to change the drill in any way, shape, or form. Just like the trainer is not supposed to change the inherent drill. He may change the intensity a little bit, but his job is not to change it. So what I'm saying is, as an example, you're practicing a technique. From Wing Chun, we'll say you're entering with a pak da, okay? So you're entering with a pak da. You're finding it difficult with the trainer to execute the pak da, or you don't like pak da, you like using lap. If you're using lap, you're not doing the drill anymore. You're no longer refining your skill set. I know you may like that other technique, but it's not what you need to do right now. It's about refining your overall toolbox and giving more tools that you have that are available to you in the later stages of training. So you need to make sure that you're not adding extra variables in that don't need to be inserted to compensate for the inadequacies or the lack of development in a particular tool set. So when you're training as the trainee, stick to the drill. If you need a little more intensity from your partner, ask the trainer, your partner, to turn it up a little bit. But don't be afraid to also ask your partner to turn it down a little bit. Again, when we're drilling, we're not in a fight. We're not in competition. We're not sparring. We're repping to get that memory of function between our brains and our bodies to create a better motor pathway for what we need to do. The next stage we have, that is actually sparring. Sparring sometimes gets confusing for most people, especially if you haven't had a lot of experience in it. Many people, when they first start sparring, they think it's a fight. Sparring is not a fight. That's the first and foremost thing you need to learn. Sparring is not the fight. One of the first clues to understanding that sparring and fighting are two different things, in most cases, you can spar with somebody in class. You know it's relatively safe. You know that after the sparring is done, you guys can laugh about it. You can go out and grab a bite to eat afterwards. In fighting is a little bit different. Fighting is not usually one of those things where you're going to want to laugh about it afterwards, unless of course you won. And second of all, you're usually not wanting to go and have a bite with somebody after you had a fight with them. So when you're doing sparring, the biggest part is to keep the ego in check. Your goal in sparring is to use a lot of the material that you've been learning and all the drills and everything, and finding out how to make those things work for you. You're going to be refining things like timing and distance and figuring out your angles and your footwork, maintaining your balance, and you're going to be getting a much more dynamic range. The other thing with that is the two roles of the two people in sparring, they're actually now contesting each other. So this brings it up to a whole new level. This is totally different than just drilling, where you can increase the intensity, but everybody agrees to what's happening. Whereas in sparring, we have an agreement as to what's acceptable in sparring, but what we're doing now is we're both testing each other, we're refining each other, like iron sharpens iron. So we're looking to refine each other and to get better. And when you're looking at this, remember, sparring, again, is not a fight, it's a learning tool. So you want to remember that, you know what, take the ego out of the equation. If something's wrong, tap, call out, whatever you need to do, whatever is normal for your studio or kun or dojo. Make sure you understand those rules of etiquette in that situation. The biggest thing we have as beginners is, again, we think if it's a fight, we have a tendency of actually either injuring ourselves or we injure others because we think it's a fight, or we don't understand the etiquette within that sparring realm. If you don't know, don't be afraid to ask. The next thing we look at, guys, the next stage down is competition. Competition is different than sparring. Sometimes people think it might be similar, but in my mind, it's very, very different. When you're looking at actual competition, you are contesting yourself directly against somebody else. There is a lot more at stake. You have a formal referee. In many cases, you're actually looking at sometimes fighting or sparring with an individual and competing against an individual that you may or may not know very well. And you'll find that there's a lot more involved with adrenaline. There's a lot more involved with a lot of the stress that goes on in there, as well as the preparation that goes into competition. So in competition, it's usually the last place you ever want to try things that you don't normally do. Sparring is for working in things that you don't normally do and refining skill sets in a dynamic set. Competition is where you want to use what you know works and stick to your game plan and listen to your cornermen and to work with your coaches and instructors accordingly based on their direction. The last one in the whole fray of modes in your training is actual fighting. And I put fighting in a totally different realm than competition. Fighting is what you see on the street. Fighting is what you see in the bars. Fighting is what you see go on in a domestic dispute. Fighting, the goal of fighting is not necessarily to win, it's to survive. Fighting has totally different repercussions than competition or sparring. Fighting, you have legal ramifications possibly, you have social issues, you're going to have a lot of other situations coming in, as well as the dynamics of what happens inside a fight is very different than what happens inside competition or in sparring. In a fight, anything goes. In a fight, weapons may be drawn. In a fight, you may have 2 opponents, 3 opponents, 5 opponents. You may be ambushed. You may end up having to deal, as I said again, with legal ramifications of all of those things and spending court time trying to defend yourself or others. So you need to recognize that. The other thing with that mindset of fighting, as I said again, is survival. It's not about winning, it's not about losing, it's about surviving the encounter and overcoming that encounter. The other thing is too, you want to remember when you're fighting, as I mentioned before in sparring, you're not probably going to be going out with a bite to eat with this individual after this is all undone. If anything, you're going to want to be getting away from that individual. You may be dealing with psychological trauma from this event, depending on the magnitude and the scope of it. So you really want to be thinking about that. These are the things that we're working on. These are the things you want to look at. So when you're working through this, remember your different modes of training. Remember that you have different ways of doing things. So you have teaching, you have actual drilling, you have sparring, you have competition, and you have fighting. Until next time, later.